What? What is this? What's happening? What? The fact that the usually calm and composed Samantha was flustered and raising her voice made it clear that something was seriously wrong. Even I, who had only been here for a few months, could sense it, and tension spread quickly among the other staff members. After a brief silence where everyone exchanged nervous glances, we hurried over to gather near Samantha's desk. She was staring at her computer screen, her mouth moving wordlessly, and her body seemed to be trembling slightly. I never imagined something like this could happen at our bank. Since I'm hiding my true background here, I figured this wasn't my place to step in. Still, I couldn't just stand by when my colleagues, with whom I'd shared ups and downs these past months, were in trouble. My name is Tate. I'm a 39-year-old employee in the credit risk management section of the bank's risk management department. I don't work for a mega bank, this is a regional bank branch. I'm single, without a girlfriend. At one point, I had thought about getting married, but now, at this age, I feel like it's not really necessary anymore. So, I'm not actively seeking a partner, and I'm content focusing solely on my job. Now, when people picture a banker, they probably imagine someone working at a counter, right? That's not wrong, but that's not my role. You could say I'm more of a behind-the-scenes guy, the type who supports things from the background. Since banks handle money, we have to be extremely cautious. Managing money, of course, but managing customer information is also a critical task. Any leak of personal information is simply unacceptable. Our job in the risk management department is to focus on those kinds of risk prevention measures. Credit risk, in particular, comes from the loans a bank issues, and if not properly managed, it could threaten the bank's very existence. That's why it requires precise control and high-level expertise. Now, I mentioned that I'm just a regular employee with no title at this bank, but it's not because I've been drifting aimlessly until the age of 39. In my previous job, I was a section chief, a stable position. When I came to this bank, they even offered me a managerial post. But I turned it down. I'd never worked at a bank before, and I knew the idea of someone like me, who was brought in for my skills, wouldn't sit well with the banking elites here. And if I'd accepted a managerial role on top of that, how do you think things would have gone? I don't like conflicts, and I hate seeing others argue. I just want to live a peaceful life. So, I chose to start out as a regular employee, in a position that wouldn't cause any trouble. Even in my previous company, I couldn't stand the petty power struggles and the relentless race for promotions. And as a single guy surrounded by married coworkers, I was the one stuck with the late-night overtime and business trips. I don't mean to complain about people who have families. That's really a supervisor's responsibility, but leaving the employees to fight among themselves like that, it disgusted me. That was one of the major reasons I decided to change jobs. When I heard this risk management department was hiring, I thought I'd give it a shot and sell myself, and to my surprise, they hired me. It was pure luck that I ended up here. I didn't want to rock the boat, and I never wanted to experience the toxic atmosphere of my last job again. That was all I cared about. A few months passed after I started working at this bank. Given the nature of the department, the workload was overwhelming, but compared to my last job, it was nothing. No one forced me into unreasonable overtime, and I could leave on time once the work was done. The fact that this was normal here, when it hadn't been normal for me before, made my life feel much more fulfilling. In my previous company, the more capable you were, the more work they piled on you, which just felt like they were exploiting your sense of purpose. This environment was exactly what I had been hoping for. And I owe it all to my direct supervisor, the head of the credit risk management section, Samantha Kirkland. At 36 years old, she earned her position through sheer skill. From my perspective, she's incredibly competent, with no weaknesses. Add to that her beauty, and there's no one who could compete with her. Everyone should handle their own work, that's fundamental. That was Samantha's favorite phrase. It was her way of saying, if you can't handle your own tasks, what are you even doing? I don't dislike that mindset. But naturally, there were people who disagreed with Samantha. One of them was Mason, a colleague 12 years younger than me at 27. He often complained about Samantha during our breaks. Samantha is like the Iron Lady with no sense of teamwork. She's supposed to be the team leader, overseeing the workload and the strengths of each team member, and delegating tasks appropriately. Instead, she takes everything on herself, and we barely get any chance to build up experience or show results. Tate, you agree with me, right? Not knowing how to respond, I just smiled awkwardly. Samantha wasn't wrong. In fact, most people thought she was pretty spot on, though no one wanted to say it out loud. That said, Mason wasn't entirely wrong either. We are a team. If someone was slacking off, it would be a different story, but in our credit risk management section, everyone was earnest and hardworking. Slacking off didn't even seem to cross their minds. So, the idea that it would be faster if we split the work among everyone made sense too. Not wanting to take sides, I just took a sip of my coffee and said, yeah, I guess so. Mason kept inviting me for coffee during breaks. And each time it became a routine for him to gripe about Samantha. Apparently, he wasn't too fond of her. While Mason was a capable employee, I always felt he had a bit of a lazy streak. He wasn't slacking, but there were times when I'd see him daydreaming at his desk. To Mason, it was probably just a short break, but Samantha was strict about that and would often criticize him for it. He'd frequently mutter, "Man, she really hates me." A few more weeks passed. Recently, there had been an increase in loan requests, which meant our credit risk management section was swamped. We had to be cautious about issuing loans, but even more importantly, we had to keep a close eye on the loans we had already issued. If a borrower went bankrupt, recovering the loan would be difficult, so knowing when to cut off a loan was crucial. Because of this, we were doing more work outside the office, and I found myself working overtime for the first time in a while. Technically, I had finished my own tasks. Even if I had to work overtime, it only took about an hour to wrap things up. But the reason I stayed late every night was to help out the others. No one asked me to, but I wanted to do it. The people here had been so kind, patiently teaching me when I didn't know what I was doing. There was no reason not to help them when they were struggling. Mason was one of those people. Whenever I helped him out, he'd say, "Tate, you're a lifesaver. I'm so sorry for causing you trouble these past few days. Thanks for your help." It didn't feel bad to be appreciated. I mentioned earlier that Samantha was strict with Mason because he took more breaks than others, but I knew something. After Mason took his short efficiency breaks, he worked harder and faster than anyone else. Even though I'd only been here a few months, I could tell that Mason was dedicated to his work. And, despite being a lonely, almost 40-year-old single guy, he was always kind to me. That went for the rest of the team too. Naturally, I wanted to help out and work together. But there was always someone to spoil that atmosphere. Of course, it was Samantha. "Mason, isn't that your job? I've seen you sneaking in those little breaks. If you've got time to take all those short rests, you should be working. If you were more efficient, Tate wouldn't have to help you with tasks he's already finished." Mason's face tightened, and he looked like he was about to argue. I quickly stepped in to mediate. "Samantha, It's not like that. I'm doing this because I want to. As you can see, I have no wife or kids, and I'm free to help out. Is it so bad that I want to assist my colleagues?" At that, Samantha went silent. She looked like she wanted to say something more, but eventually just nodded and returned to her desk, saying it was fine as long as I didn't mind. I let out a sigh of relief, but as expected, Mason couldn't keep quiet. "What's her problem? Seriously? It's not like I'm slacking off. I just took a 5-minute break to rest my eyes, and she's giving me grief over it. Come on, calm down. She doesn't mean any harm. Samantha's just trying to make sure everyone can leave on time. She's willing to play the bad guy to make that happen." As I tried to calm Mason down, he fell silent, clearly understanding what Samantha was thinking in his own way. It was almost 6 p.m., so I hurried to finish my work. Just as I took some of Mason's tasks to move them to my desk, something unusual happened. Samantha raised her voice. What is this? What's happening? What? The fact that the usually calm and composed Samantha was flustered and shouting made it clear that something was seriously wrong. Even though I'd only been here a few months, I could sense it, and the tension spread among the other staff members. After exchanging tense glances, everyone rushed over to gather near Samantha's desk. Samantha was staring at her computer screen, her mouth moving wordlessly, and her body seemed to tremble slightly. What happened? Peeking from a distance, I saw the bank's internal security system flashing a warning on her screen. Sensing trouble, I ran over to Samantha and asked quickly, "What happened?" I got a notification about a security software update, so I clicked the link to log in, but I couldn't log in no matter how many times I tried. Then the system started lagging, and now this warning message popped up. At first glance, the website looked like the usual security site, and I even confirmed it was using HTTPS. But something about the logo at the bottom fell off. Before I could say more, the screen suddenly went black. From behind me, I heard worried murmurs from the others who had been watching. "This is bad. It might be malware. Unauthorized access." With that, everyone's eyes turned to me. And for good reason. For us, a data breach involving customer information was unthinkable. People have probably seen companies apologizing in press conferences after hackers leaked personal information following unauthorized access. That's likely what everyone was imagining. For a bank, trust is everything. And right now, that trust was under threat. It seemed like someone had tricked Samantha into entering her credentials on a fake site, and now, they were using those credentials to steal data. Whoever was behind this was highly skilled. This must be a professional hacker with advanced skills. Now that they've breached our system, there's a good chance they've planted a backdoor. We can't handle this ourselves anymore. We need to contact a forensic investigation team immediately. We were out of time. Every passing minute could mean the hacker was extracting personal data. But this is a bank, and we've fortified our defenses for such threats. The more sensitive the information, the stronger the protections. Breaking through wouldn't be easy, even for a skilled hacker. Although everyone was initially stunned, these were seasoned professionals. Mason, leading the charge, said, "I'll go report to the manager Kent," and with that, the team sprang into action. Despite the underlying panic, everyone was doing their best to help. Some called the headquarters, others called the branch manager, and some were already contacting security firms to arrange forensic analysis. While the rest of us were moving quickly, Samantha remained frozen, her eyes wide with fear. She muttered, "What should I do? What should I do?" seemingly unable to process what was happening. There was no time to explain again. I wanted to offer her some encouragement, but I knew mere words wouldn't be enough. There was only one thing to do. I steeled myself and shouted, "You're not the type of person who gives up that easily." My words seemed to snap Samantha back to reality. Her eyes regained focus, and she looked determined once again. She slapped her own cheeks, as if to snap herself out of it, and the panic in her expression vanished. "That's right. What am I doing in this state? There's work that needs to be done. I need to get a grip." That's the resolute Samantha I knew. But just as things started to settle, another problem arose. Mason and another employee contacted the security company to request a forensic investigation. However, since it was after hours, there were only a few staff members available to respond. Although the investigation could still proceed due to their 24-hour response system, there was a logistical problem. This is a regional bank branch. Being in a rural area, even if a representative were dispatched immediately, it would take at least 30 minutes for them to arrive. Ideally, we shouldn't touch the computer until the specialist arrives, but we couldn't afford to wait. I started thinking fast. Why did I come to this bank, leaving my past behind, to start over? It only took a few seconds, but it felt like I had been thinking for hours. Finally, I made up my mind. Without saying a word, I sat down in front of Samantha's desk and placed my hands on the keyboard. "Tate, what are you doing?" "They told us not to touch anything," Samantha protested. I responded calmly, overriding her words. "The bank is in trouble. Let me do what I can. I can't just sit back and watch." Samantha's eyes wavered at my words. No one knew what the right course of action was at this point. But if someone could lead us to the correct solution, they had to act. Forensic analysis of ransomware requires advanced log analysis skills, technical expertise, and experience. In other words, an average security engineer wouldn't be able to handle it. That's why companies usually rely on outside specialists for situations like this. In larger corporations, there may be in-house engineers, but due to cost and logistics, a small rural bank like ours didn't have such a luxury. That much was common sense for someone like me. This was probably why the hacker had targeted our branch in the first place. Once they gained access here, it might only be a matter of time before they could breach the headquarters' critical databases. The attacker was more formidable than we had imagined. I swallowed hard, took a deep breath, and started typing on the keyboard. Samantha moved to stop me, but Mason shook his head, holding her back. Everyone else, though worried, could only stand by and watch as I worked. The tension was palpable, but adrenaline coursed through me, and my fingers moved faster and faster on the keyboard. After a while, I finally raised my head, letting out a sigh. Immediately, questions came at me from all directions. What happened? I don't really understand what you were doing, but is it over?" I smiled and explained the situation. "I managed to secure the important personal data. I moved it to a safe server, so that should be fine. However, the attacker was quick. And there's a possibility they extracted some past contract data. The data extracted wasn't sensitive customer information, just basic contract details from past agreements. While there was a small leak, it wasn't the kind of disaster that would force us to apologize to our customers on our knees." Upon hearing that, the tension in the room lifted. Some collapsed into their chairs, while others let out shouts of joy. But Samantha remained solemn, staring at me intently. Not long after, the representative from the security company arrived. I explained the situation and asked them to double-check everything. The representative looked surprised but quickly confirmed the results, muttering, "This is incredible. As you mentioned, the virus threat appears to be neutralized. We didn't detect any backdoors either. However, considering the possibility of future attacks, well, it looks like I won't be needed here." I'm impressed, Tate. "So this is where you've been?" "Yes, well, it's been a while." "How have you been?" Since the representative and I knew each other from before, the rest of the team watched our conversation in puzzlement. Shortly afterward, Mr. Ogilvy, the bank president, along with some executive officers, arrived, having heard about the incident. They bombarded the representative with questions, who reassured them that everything was under control and briefly explained the next steps before leaving. Mr. Ogilvy and the executives, clearly busy, said they would explain any consequences later and left. It was already past 9 p.m. Then, at long last, Mason turned to me with a curious look and asked his question. "So, what's the deal here?" I kept quiet because I didn't want to interfere, but Tate, you're not just a regular guy, are you? Mason, always sharp, had suspected from the moment I joined that I wasn't an ordinary employee. "Yeah, I've had my suspicions. I mean, someone who's 39 and had a solid career before, starting as a regular employee? That was a red flag. Plus, you seem to know that security company rep pretty well. So, Tate, your previous job, security engineer, right?" Mason's confident declaration made me burst out laughing, perhaps finally releasing the tension that had built up. "Right on," I said, and with that, I decided to reveal my past to Mason. I hadn't planned on telling anyone, but I figured it wouldn't hurt to share it with Mason and the others in our department. Even though everyone still had work left to do, they indulged me for a few minutes as I shared my story. As we all chatted and laughed together, I realized something: Samantha wasn't part of the group. The next day, as soon as I arrived at work, Samantha called me over. I had a feeling I knew what this was about, so I followed her without asking. It was fall, and the chill in the air made a cup of hot coffee taste just right. We sat on a bench in the park behind the bank, and without a word, Samantha handed me a cup of black coffee. Even though Samantha wasn't fond of black coffee and had mentioned liking sweet things, it seemed she knew that I preferred mine black. I thought to myself that, despite her tough exterior with Mason, she must actually be looking out for him as well. In fact, I had heard talk of Mason being up for a promotion. As I pondered these things and took a sip of the coffee she gave me, Samantha finally spoke. "I overheard something. Tate, you used to be a hacker, didn't you?" "Well, most people call it white hat hacker these days. Technically, a hacker isn't a bad term, but when people mean it in a bad way, they call it a cracker." "Oh, sorry, I caught myself before I went too far with technical explanations." But Samantha, smiling in a way I had never seen before, said, "Go on." Since we still had time before work started and she seemed genuinely interested, I decided to share a bit more. I explained the technical terms I had used the day before and told her the same story I had shared with Mason and the others. The term hacker often brings negative connotations, but in reality, it's not inherently bad. Put simply, it refers to someone highly skilled in computers. A cracker is someone who uses that knowledge for malicious purposes, like the unauthorized access we dealt with yesterday. Since most people can't distinguish between the two, they started calling ethical hackers white hat hackers. I'm not bragging, but back in the day, I was considered a genius white hat hacker. I loved math and physics as a kid. And I was the kind of elementary schooler who'd say Isaac Newton was my favorite person. I was so into the sciences that I chose Fermat's last theorem as the topic for my thesis. Looking back, those days were really fun because I could do anything. I was proud of using my skills to help people, which is why I pursued a career as a security engineer. I wanted to become skilled enough to work as a freelancer. In my 20s, that was my goal, and I threw myself into planning, implementing, operating, and maintaining security systems, even training younger engineers. I obtained certifications like CISSP, which is highly regarded in the industry, and CISM, because I wanted to specialize in security. By my mid-30s, my career was smooth sailing. Given my track record, I was supposed to take a key position at headquarters. But I turned it down, saying, I believe it's crucial to have someone at rural branches who can respond to security issues immediately. In my experience, branches are often targeted, and important data has been extracted from simple work computers. Crackers know how to exploit security holes, and they're well aware of companies' manpower shortages and cost-cutting measures. That's why I was assigned to this rural branch. But that wasn't the only reason. There was something else, a lingering feeling that brought me here, something unresolved. Samantha Nash. Do you remember me? I asked. Samantha's eyes widened in surprise when I mentioned her maiden name. But then she quickly softened her expression and said, So it was you. You were that engineer back then. A moment of silence passed as I reflected on the past. It was several years ago, long before I came to this bank. At the time, I had been working for a different company when we received a request from a business run by a man named Mr. Nash. He wanted to discuss improving his company's security, and I was assigned to handle the project. However, just before the meeting, Mr. Nash suddenly passed away due to illness, and his daughter, Samantha, who had been groomed as his successor, took over the company. Just like I had a past, so did Samantha. Before becoming a department head, she was once the president of her father's company. Samantha had managed to run things at the top after her father's sudden death, but things did not go so well. It was likely that being the daughter of the president, Mr. Nash faced backlash. After all, a young woman with little experience had easily taken over the role of president simply because of her lineage. When the bank cut off funding, the company's finances quickly plunged into the red. Even so, Samantha, determined to keep the company her father built alive, tackled everything with a positive attitude. In fact, I once visited the company during her tenure as president, intending to discuss a contract initiated during her father's time. When I arrived, I witnessed Samantha arguing with her employees. She was passionately explaining the importance of strengthening security and stressing that they should invest in maintenance and inspection. But the employees weren't having it. They were saying things like, if you're going to spend money, give us a raise instead. I remember it vividly. In the end, the contract fell through, and I didn't meet with Samantha again after that. But I later heard that the company had gone bankrupt. The image of Samantha's determined face, as she earnestly tried to win everyone over, stuck with me. We had only met once, and yet, that image of her repeatedly bowing her head to try and persuade people left a strong impression on me. When I heard that her company had gone under and she had abandoned her father's name, Nash, and taken on her mother's maiden name, Kirkland, I became curious. A few years later, I was considering a job change when Mr. Ogilvy, the bank's president, invited me to dinner. He had heard I was looking for a new job and headhunted me. Well, I had done my share of selling myself to the bank beforehand, so it wasn't exactly the typical headhunting scenario. Originally, I had planned to take the job at the bank's headquarters, but something Mr. Ogilvy said made me reconsider completely. Our branches really need to strengthen their security soon. If you came on board, it would be a great help. I'd love your advice. We'll start with this branch. Samantha Kirkland is actively pushing for these changes, so it makes sense to start there. There are plenty of people named Nash across the country. So I wasn't sure, but in a way, it was a gamble. Could it be that the former Nash, the woman president I'd met back then, was now going by Kirkland? Maybe I could see her again. That hope drove me to request an assignment at this branch. I kept my previous career hidden, as I mentioned before, to avoid creating waves. That was the only reason. As I finished my story, I glanced over at Samantha, who had been listening intently, and saw that tears were streaming down her face. Had I said something wrong? Maybe bringing up the past was a mistake. Not knowing how to comfort her, especially since I had little experience with women, I panicked and stammered. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to make you uncomfortable by bringing up old memories." As I stepped back, Samantha gently said, "No, that's not it." Her voice was soft and kind, and I breathed a sigh of relief as I raised my head. Samantha, still gripping her cup of sweetened coffee, seemed lost in thought, looking down for a moment. Then, she raised her head again and gazed straight into my eyes. I froze, caught by her brown eyes, as she spoke. "I'm touched that you remembered that young, inexperienced woman who had just become a company president. From your perspective, I must have seemed like a complete novice who didn't even understand the basics of management, yet I was arrogantly lecturing you about security. It's laughable, really. There were so many things I should have focused on, but I didn't." In the end, after that, the company's financial troubles deepened, and a security breach led to a data leak. I had to take responsibility, and I closed the company. I held my breath, surprised by this revelation. Suddenly, everything made sense. Samantha's breakdown the day before, her panic. She must have been reliving the trauma from that time. Even a small company can be brought to its knees by a data leak, sometimes leaving behind massive debts. It seems Samantha had distanced herself from her father's name, Nash, because of those debts. Apparently, her father, in a desperate attempt to hide the company's financial troubles, had borrowed money from some shady sources. To escape the debt collectors, Samantha had started using her mother's maiden name, Kirkland. Then, Samantha revealed something unexpected. "I actually remembered you too. I didn't recognize you at first because you've lost weight and cut your hair short. But back then, when my family was being pointed at, and people whispered about our company's impending bankruptcy, not a single person stood by us. Not even when the debt collectors were chasing us. But you showed up for that meeting with me. It made me a little happy, you know." She went on to tell me how she became the head of this department. It turned out that the branch manager here was her relative. Concerned for her well-being, he took her in because he valued her diligence. But Samantha, not wanting to be seen as relying on connections, had put on a tough front, playing the role of the Iron Lady and being strict with everyone, including herself. She had hidden her true self, all because she wanted to be recognized for her own abilities. Because I was the branch manager's relative, no one would say anything to my face. But yesterday, Tate, you called me out without caring about that. It really woke me up in more ways than one. Thank you. As I looked at Samantha, her cheeks flushed, I felt as though my heart had been grabbed. It seemed that despite only meeting once before, we had been drawn to each other all along. Like opposite poles of a magnet, I said. Can you stop with the confusing metaphors? She replied, but she was smiling brighter than I had ever seen her before. The usual look of pressure and responsibility had completely melted away, revealing the true Samantha underneath. Later, the cracker was arrested, but Samantha took responsibility for what had happened and offered to resign. However, everyone convinced her to stay. It was true that Samantha had acted hastily, pressing the button due to the trauma of her previous company's collapse after being hacked. But because of the swift actions that followed, mine included, we were able to avoid the worst-case scenario. So, it was agreed with the bosses that Samantha would start over as a regular employee. Everyone breathed a sigh of relief when they heard the news. Mason, too, shared in that relief. If Samantha leaves, this place is doomed. He joked. Strangely enough, I was the one chosen to take over as her replacement. As Mason put it, the fact that someone who was supposed to work at headquarters is a department head at a branch is already unusual. So just roll with it. With encouragement from everyone, including Samantha herself, I didn't really have a choice but to accept. Being the department head in a specialized field like risk management wasn't easy, and there were times when I had to work overtime. But we had established a flexible and cooperative relationship that made the work rewarding. Even Mason, who had once criticized Samantha's methods, now said, "I guess I should just trust my own judgment." My goal is to establish my own unshakable style, no matter what anyone says, indicating that he had come to understand her way of thinking. Similarly, Samantha had softened. Sometimes, working together as a team really is the faster way, she admitted. Even apologizing to Mason for being too hard on him in the past. Her ability to acknowledge her mistakes so honestly showed what a kind-hearted person she was. Mason, in turn, promised to be more mindful, avoiding the habit of wandering off or daydreaming at his desk. In this way, we created a space where everyone respected each other's perspectives and values. As a result, I was finally living the peaceful life I had always envisioned. This is strange. The documents are blank, said my boss, Emily, her face pale and lips trembling as she stood nervously on stage. We were at an international conference presenting our company's latest technology development. When I checked the documents Emily was holding, I saw that they had all been replaced with blank sheets of copy paper. Who could have done something like this? But there was no time to think. As the minutes ticked by and the presentation still hadn't started, the room began to grow restless. I glanced over at Emily, who was trying to explain from memory, but her speech was shaky, and she kept making mistakes in English. The room became even more unsettled. That's when I did something Emily never expected. I grabbed the microphone. What? Why? You? Ignoring her surprise, I began my speech in English, recalling everything I had memorized from the documents. When I finally finished, the room fell into a brief silence. But what awaited afterward was something no one could have predicted. After stepping off the stage, a gentleman approached me. Feeling there was no need to hide, I told him which university I graduated from. So, you weren't just anyone after all. Emily, unable to hide her surprise, spoke to me. My name is John. I'm just a regular employee working at a company that handles biomass energy production. I switched jobs just a year ago, and in the technical department where I work, I'm at the bottom of the ladder. The company is only 5 years old, but with many talented employees, it's seen as a rising star in the industry, attracting a lot of attention. There was a time when I left my previous company and wandered around aimlessly without having secured my next job. Seeing my situation, my uncle, Howard, who is also the president of this company, stepped in and said, "John, if you haven't found your next job yet, why don't you come work for us? The skills you gained at your previous job could really be put to use here." What do you think? That's how I ended up joining this company. I joined the company, but because of some trauma from my previous job, I wasn't eager to take the initiative at work. My previous company was a major power company, but the seniority system and cliques based on university affiliations were rampant. Since there was no one from my university, I was always left out. Despite having a fair amount of skills and knowledge, I became a target of the typical tall poppy syndrome that companies often have. For the people in those cliques, my competence must have been a threat. Without any protection or support, I was eventually sidelined. I couldn't stand being treated like that just because I didn't belong to a particular clique, so I left the company. After wandering aimlessly for a while, I realized that my passion for biotechnology was still burning inside me. That was one of the reasons I accepted my uncle's offer. My interest in biotechnology had always been influenced by my uncle. He doesn't have any children, so whenever I visited him, he treated me like his own son. He used to talk passionately about biotechnology to me, even when I was just a kid, and that made me want to work in that field someday. I had considered working for my uncle's company from the start, but a part of me wanted to test how far I could go on my own. In the end, I couldn't stand the environment at my previous job and quit. My uncle reached out to me at just the right time, and I felt saved. Though I joined this company at the request of Howard, when I saw the managers clashing over their university affiliations, I thought, oh no. This company has cliques too, and I felt a bit uneasy. But unlike before, I wasn't sidelined. In fact, I was given my fair share of work, so I decided to lay low and just do the tasks assigned to me. John, which university did you go to? One of my colleagues asked, but I refused to answer. I was worried that if they knew, they might start treating me the same way as at my old job. He probably went to some third-rate school he's too embarrassed to admit. Yeah, how did someone like that even get into this company? Who knows, maybe it was just luck. Exactly. Let's just leave the grunt work to someone from a third-rate university. That seemed to settle it for them, and they never asked about my alma mater again. But I was constantly given menial tasks and treated like a newbie just because of my supposed third-rate background. Still, it was a world of difference from my previous company, and even doing the grunt work, I found myself satisfied with the environment. The tech department I work in is responsible for deciding how to shape and market the products our company develops. It plays a key role in both marketing and bridging the gap between the development department and sales teams. The development department is made up of highly specialized experts, but the tech department, which determines how to apply those developments, is also filled with highly educated individuals, second only to the development team. My direct supervisor, Emily, is a beautiful and capable boss who graduated from Kyoto University. Then there's Mark, another manager who graduated from Tokyo University, and he's equally competent. Because of this, the two are constantly competing, viewing each other as rivals. While their rivalry is partly because they joined the company at the same time, it seemed like Mark had a particular grudge against Emily. Maybe something happened between them when they first started, but I had no way of knowing. I just assumed they couldn't stand each other. One day, as I was doing some menial tasks for Emily, Mark, always eager to take a jab at her, made a snide remark. A third-rate university guy, huh? Looks like all you're good for is grunt work. Poor Emily, getting stuck with a subordinate like you. My team, on the other hand, is filled with top-notch talent. The company clearly knows who to bet on. And they've given me the best because they expect great things from me. Emily and this third-rate guy are clearly seen for what they are, unworthy. It's one thing to insult me, But why look down on Emily like that? Mark! Just as I was about to retort, Emily cut him off with a sharp reply. Mark, you seem to have a lot of free time, don't you? Oh, that's right. You can just leave everything to your brilliant team, can't you? Must be tough for them, doing all the work while you take all the credit. Keep that up, and they'll start leaving you one by one. But hey, that's none of my concern. Just make sure not to cry when it happens. Your arrogance is only going to last for so long. Tisk, you're no fun. I was just trying to give you a friendly warning. A warning? More like you're mocking me. Could you cut it out with the insults toward my team? I'm perfectly happy with John's work. And by the way, I'm busy. I don't have time to deal with someone with nothing better to do. Now, please get out of my way and go back to work. Emily's fierce glare made Mark retreat back to his desk in defeat. I couldn't help but feel guilty that Emily had to endure such comments just because of me and my supposed third-rate background. I'm sorry, Emily. Why are you apologizing? You always do your job well, and I appreciate it. If anything, I should be the one apologizing. Letting Mark say whatever he wants about you. No, Emily, let him say what he wants. I don't mind. Okay then, but let's keep up the good work. Now, back to work. Having been worn out by all the cliques at my previous company, Emily's consideration was a breath of fresh air. She didn't judge me based on my university but on the actual quality of my work. It was the first time I'd ever had a boss I truly respected. A new technology had just been developed by the R&D department, and it was handed over to our tech department. The innovation was groundbreaking, and the upper management announced that it would be presented at an upcoming international conference in Japan. We're holding a competition within the tech department to come up with the best plan for presenting this technology. Whoever wins will get to present at the conference. Let's do our best to win this. Emily and the rest of us steadily prepared for the competition. I had a feeling she didn't want to lose to Mark. Mark was no different, telling his team, "We are winning this competition, no matter what." Mark, on the other hand, seemed determined not to lose to Emily. His competitive spirit was stronger than ever. The atmosphere in the tech department was tense, with everyone focused on the competition. In the midst of this, Mark kept targeting me more than usual. This is an important competition for an international conference. People like you, with no talent, are just in the way. Get out of the tech department already. Mark. What are you talking about? John is not incompetent at all. When he organizes documents, he picks out the key points perfectly. When I ask him to translate reports, he even includes relevant references. You won't find a more capable subordinate. Oh wait, I get it. You think you're going to lose the competition, don't you? That's why you're lashing out at someone as talented as John. Admit it. You're just jealous that I have such a great team member. Go ahead, say it. Emily spoke with a confident smirk on her face. Damn it. I'm not losing this competition. Unable to come up with a response, Mark stormed off angrily. I couldn't believe Emily thought so highly of me. I never imagined I'd be seen in that light, and I felt incredibly fortunate to have her as my boss. John, we don't have much time before the competition. Stop dawdling and get those documents ready. After praising me, Emily immediately switched gears and gave me a firm order before returning to her work. Both her compliments and her instructions made me happy. I wanted to win this competition alongside her. I was determined to do everything I could. That was my way of repaying her for her kind words. At my previous company, I never even felt like this. With her words echoing in my mind, I got to work. The day of the in-house competition arrived. Both Emily and Mark gave outstanding presentations, determined not to lose to each other. After a hard-fought battle, Emily emerged victorious by a slim margin. Mark's frustration was clear. Beside him, Emily stood with a hint of pride in her expression. "I have to admit, I lost to you in this competition. But next time, I'll make sure to win. I'm not planning on losing either. Well, for now, let's call a truce for the international conference. I'll help you with your proposal to make sure this project succeeds." Mark, determined to unite the tech department, aimed to move forward as a team. For someone like me, who had seen sabotage and underhanded tactics used to bring down rivals in my previous job, I was taken aback by Mark's willingness to collaborate for the company's success. But I realized this is how a company should ideally operate, and it made sense to me. With everyone working together, our department's carefully crafted proposal steadily progressed toward the international conference. The sight of Emily and Mark working side by side was almost dazzling to me. On the day of the conference, our company was honored with the final presentation due to the brilliance of our project. Normally, a major power company would close the event as the highlight. But Emily's proposal was so groundbreaking that even the experts were impressed, earning us that prestigious spot. The fact that our presentation was suddenly moved to the final slot showed just how high the expectations were. The tension increased whether we liked it or not. At the time, we hadn't noticed the man who was bitter about us getting the final slot. We never imagined how it would escalate into the situation that unfolded. The presentation right before ours was by the major power company where I had worked. When I entered the shared waiting room, I saw several faces I wished I hadn't, and I couldn't shake the sinking feeling that washed over me. I tried to avoid eye contact, but my former colleague Miles approached me with a smug grin, as if he was amused by my discomfort. "John, long time no see. So, you couldn't make it at our company and ended up at some tiny firm? You've really fallen, haven't you? Well, at least you can still do your job, I guess." He mocked me with a smug grin. Miles was a former colleague of mine, and we had joined the company at the same time. He graduated from Tokyo University and belonged to a powerful clique. Because of that, he landed in important departments and steadily built up his achievements, while I, with no connections, was pushed into an insignificant role, and he often mocked me for it. Even after leaving that company, he's still belittling me, even here. It filled me with frustration. Seeing people I never wanted to meet again being ridiculed by Miles, I started to regret coming here. "Hey, is that you, Miles? Long time no see." I turned around, and there stood Mark. In my current situation, Mark's presence was a relief. He had accompanied Emily to the international conference to assist her with the presentation. Presenting at the international conference meant we were essentially representing the country. Failure was not an option. They were clearly taking every precaution to ensure success. Come to think of it, Mark graduated from Tokyo University. Is that why he knows Miles? As I wondered about it, Mark grinned and teased Miles, "You haven't changed a bit." Looking uncomfortable, Miles quickly said, "Long time no see. I've got to get ready, so excuse me," and hurried away. "Mark, do you know Miles?" "Yeah, he was one of my students back when I was working on my doctorate." "Oh, I see." Mark had earned his doctorate, and during that time, Miles had been one of his students. He's always been a sneaky guy. I wonder who he takes after. Still the same sarcastic type, too. Mark laughed as he said this, and I couldn't find anything to say in response. Mark's words hit the mark, but I had a feeling that if I said anything, he'd just mock me like usual. Miles worked in a different department, but he always found opportunities to belittle and harass me. He had always been that way, and I couldn't help but think, well, I guess he really does take after his mentor. John, we've got work to do. You're still the rookie, so get to it. Mark spoke to me in his usual commanding tone. Though it wasn't his intention, I felt like Mark had thrown me a lifeline, revealing an unexpected side of him. There had to be a reason why Miles had hurriedly left in such a panic. I couldn't help but wonder if Mark had some leverage over him. Finally, it was our turn to present. I was assigned to assist Emily and stood beside her. She carried the materials as we both stepped up onto the stage. The plan was to explain the project using the documents while referencing the visuals displayed on the monitor, but things weren't going as planned. When I looked over at Emily, her face had turned pale, and she was frantically searching for something. Even though she had the documents in her hand, something was clearly wrong. Emily, what's wrong? You look terrible. What's going on? With trembling lips, she muttered quietly, "This is strange. The documents are blank." Panicked, I quickly checked the materials. All the documents, which were supposed to be in English for the presentation, had been replaced with blank sheets of copy paper. On top of that, the laptop containing the data wasn't working, so it wouldn't even turn on. Who could have done something like this? But there was no time for finger-pointing. Time was ticking away. The delay in starting the presentation was causing a stir in the audience. Emily tried to recall the information and began speaking, but she was too nervous. Stumbling over her words and making mistake after mistake in English, which only caused the room to grow more restless. This wasn't going to work. I decided to go backstage and report to Mark that the materials had been stolen. "Mark, someone has switched the presentation documents with blank sheets." "What?" "Also, the laptop containing the data isn't working. Could you arrange for another one so we can access the files?" "Got it. I'll get it sorted right away." Mark went to the conference staff, explained the situation, and arranged for a laptop to be provided. Meanwhile, time was ticking away. The audience grew increasingly restless. I grabbed the microphone from a flustered Emily and, recalling the information in my head, began explaining in her place. I had been involved in the preparation for the conference, compiling references, organizing materials, and making copies. Since I had reviewed the documents so many times, all the information was stored in my memory. Using that knowledge, I explained the project in English, matching my words to the slides in front of me. "What? John? Why?" Emily later told me she was surprised by how fluent my English was and how confidently I presented the project. Snapping back to reality, she left the stage, trusting me to handle the rest of the explanation. In the meantime, Mark had managed to get a laptop, and he and Emily returned to the stage just as I reached the latter half of the presentation. I felt a wave of relief. Though I had most of the information memorized, there were still parts one wasn't sure about. With the laptop up and running, I continued my presentation, now able to check the data as I went. When I finished, there was a brief silence, followed by thunderous applause. Cheers of bravo echoed through the room. Though it had started off rocky, in the end, everything turned out well. Our project presentation was a success. I bowed and stepped down from the stage. Even then, the applause didn't stop. Finally, it was over. I felt an overwhelming sense of relief. But just as I relaxed, my legs gave out, and I collapsed right there. Seeing this, Emily and Mark rushed over, supporting me by the arms as they helped me backstage. "John, great job. Your English was so fluent, and I'm amazed." I was so nervous that my mind went blank, and I couldn't think straight. I don't even want to imagine what would have happened if you hadn't stepped in. Thank you. Yeah, John, you were incredible, not just with your English, but how confident you looked up there. Emily and Mark praised me for my performance. I blushed a little from their praise. Just then, a gentleman approached me. The foreign man walked up, hugged me, and exclaimed, "I knew it. It's you, Johnny." "You're Johnny, aren't you? Who is that?" Emily and Mark asked in surprise. "Mr. Smith, it's been a long time." I responded. "Mr. Smith?" Emily and Mark looked at me curiously. Since Mr. Smith would probably explain things anyway, there was no need to hide it. After all, they were the ones who had praised my speech earlier. For the first time here, I mentioned my alma mater. Mr. Smith was my professor at Harvard and also my academic advisor. "What? Harvard?" They both exclaimed in unison, and I replied with a sheepish smile, "Yeah, more or less." Mr. Smith said, "That's right." Back in his Harvard days, Johnny was an excellent student and graduated at the top of his class. Top of the class? Once again, Emily and Mark were shocked. Mr. Smith continued speaking, barely noticing their reaction. "You were incredible during that presentation, as always. I'm so proud to see you're still doing great things." Mr. Smith gave me a hearty pat on the shoulder and laughed cheerfully. His face was beaming with a broad smile. "Well, I hope we meet again soon." Mr. Smith said that and walked away. A long silence followed, and when I looked at Emily and Mark, they both had furrowed brows, clearly deep in thought. Feeling uncomfortable, I straightened myself up and tried to quickly make my way back to the waiting room. "So, you really aren't just anyone, are you?" It was Emily who broke the silence. She, who had always observed my work, smiled and said, "You never mentioned your alma mater, so everyone assumed you went to some third-rate school. But from the way you organize documents and the precision of your reports, I always knew you weren't from some mediocre university. But still, graduating at the top of your class at Harvard? You never cease to amaze me, John." She said this with a smile. "Yeah, whether it's Tokyo University or Kyoto University, there's no competing with Harvard." Even Mark, with a wry smile, agreed as he said that. "No, I just got really into biotechnology, that's all." "It's not such a big deal," I said, trying to downplay it. "What are you talking about, Mr. Top of the Class? What are you talking about, Mr. Top of the Class?" Once again, they were perfectly in sync, laughing together. I used to think they were like oil and water, but to see them this in tune, it was like they were reading each other's minds. It seemed like their teamwork on this project had forged a sense of camaraderie, creating an atmosphere only the two of them could understand. After that, we discovered who had stolen Mark's documents. "Emily, we caught the guy who stole the documents." "What? Who is it?" "It was someone from the major electric company before us." "You know him, John, it's Miles." Mark found it hard to believe that one of his former students was the culprit, but it also made sense. Back in his school days, Miles used to turn in reports that others had written for him. And he would even steal other people's research ideas and pass them off as his own. His father was a professor at Tokyo University, so many students felt they had no choice but to comply with the pressure. Even Mark couldn't resist it at the time. It seemed like Mark had joined this company to escape those chains. I realized that Mark had his own struggles, which made me feel unexpectedly close to him. I noticed Miles acting suspiciously in the waiting room. He always gets nervous when he's up to something. He was like that in college too. I suspected he might be involved, so I confronted him. He tried to hide a paper bag, but when I snatched it from him and checked inside, sure enough, it had the documents for the competition, Mark said, laughing. I was impressed by how well Mark knew his former student, Miles. Thanks to Mark, we were able to catch the culprit. Regarding Miles's fate, Emily said, from here on, it's best not to act on our own. We should leave it to the company's lawyers. So we decided to head back to the office. I felt sorry for Miles, knowing that after building up his career so far, there was probably no future left for him at the company. However, considering what he had done, I felt he deserved the consequences. After that, Emily, Mark, and I returned to the office and reported everything to President Howard. It must have been tough, but it looks like the project presentation went well. Great job, everyone. President Howard, thoroughly satisfied, praised and thanked us for our hard work. Mr. Howard, did you know that John graduated at the top of his class from Harvard? Emily asked. Of course I knew, he's my nephew. After he left his previous job and hadn't decided on a new company, I invited him to join us. What? Why didn't you tell us that? Well, John told me that his background caused him problems at his last job, and he ended up getting sidelined because of it. So, I thought it would be better to keep it quiet this time. He also asked me not to mention that he was my nephew. He spoke, clearly flustered by Emily's intense demeanor. Cats hide their claws. That's John in a nutshell. I'm lucky to have such a skilled subordinate. Now I'll have to make sure he keeps up the hard work. With that, Emily flashed a confident, sly smile. Yeah, if he's that good, he'll have plenty of work coming his way. Even Mark said that as he gave me a pat on the shoulder. Seeing the look in their eyes as they agreed, I felt a cold sweat run down my back, sensing an indescribable fear. I truly owe a lot to my uncle, President Howard. If it weren't for him, I might never have escaped my disillusionment with people. Meeting a boss I could respect helped reignite my passion for biotechnology. Later, Miles ended up being forced out of his company. Whether it was the company's decision or his own, we never found out, but his company's official stance was that it was his decision alone. We heard about it from President Howard later. Despite his loyalty to his faction, not even they would stand up for Miles. It might have been a reflection of the culture at the company. After that, I unexpectedly found myself promoted to the position of project leader. It was also a recognition of the success of the international conference. But the role of project leader was really just a glorified assistant to Emily and Mark. Proof of this was how, despite being Emily's direct subordinate, Mark would also take advantage of my position. Emily, it's not fair for you to hog John all to yourself. What are you talking about? John is my capable subordinate. There's no way I'm letting him be your lackey. As Mark tried to pull me along, Emily stopped him and firmly said her piece. Watching the two of them bicker over me was like seeing children fighting over a toy, and I couldn't help but find it amusing. I find their daily back and forth quite endearing. They've probably been aware of each other since they started at the company, but being rivals seemed to have drawn a line between them. If I noticed it, I'm sure everyone else had too. The only ones unaware were the two of them. There they go again, Emily and Mark are at it. Honestly, it's like they're always fighting over nothing. They might as well just get together already. Yeah, but wouldn't they just fight every day if they did? Who knows? Mark might end up completely under Emily's thumb. Yeah, you're probably right. I overheard these murmurs among our team. What are you talking about? Emily asked. Nothing at all. They exchanged glances and laughed. Thinking back, maybe their cooperation during the international conference came from them not really disliking each other after all. I believe that rivalry begins with mutual recognition and respect. It's rare to find someone who can push you to grow and improve like that. Seeing how much they appreciate and think of each other, I can't help but think, why don't they just get together already? Someday, I'm going to tell them exactly that, since they're both completely oblivious to each other's feelings. I'm sorry. What? On the flight, I couldn't help myself when I saw a flight attendant walking around showing her underwear, so I stood up and approached her. Sir. Oh no, is this a pervert? Here, of all places? The flight attendant screamed, and the surrounding passengers went into a frenzy. All because I got too close to her. How long do you plan to keep touching me? She glared at me with tears in her eyes. But right after that, I'd like to see you later. A message she sent to me. That was the unexpected beginning of our evening together. Ladies and gentlemen, the aircraft is now cruising. The seatbelt sign turns off with the in-flight announcement. The tension that was in the air since takeoff finally eases a little. Passengers' voices start to rise from all around the cabin. Look, Mom, we're flying in the sky. Where should we go first when we get there? I love this moment. My name is Bradley, and I'm 28 years old. Right now, I'm on a domestic flight for work. Would you like something to drink? Now that the plane has leveled off, the flight attendant, or FA, starts walking down the aisle with the cart. I consider ordering a coffee as I gaze out the window. The weather has been clear since morning, and the view outside is more spectacular than ever. Are we looking at the same thing right now, I wonder? Sir? Whoa! I was so engrossed in the view outside that I didn't notice her until she spoke to me. The FA had reached my seat at the front of the plane without me realizing it. Because I suddenly raised my voice, she looked at me with wide eyes. I'm sorry, I was worried you might not be feeling well. No, I'm fine, I'm sorry. I apologized and asked for coffee, then she replied with a bright smile, certainly. I couldn't help but be captivated by her smile. What a beautiful person, with such a gorgeous smile, I thought. People often say FAs are often beautiful, and seeing her, I had to agree. Her features are, of course, striking, and her brisk movements exude elegance. Her posture, standing tall and straight, is stunning as well. I couldn't help but follow her movements with my eyes until she handed me the cup of coffee. Here you go. It's hot, so please be careful. Oh, thank you. Smiling again, she turned around to attend to a passenger calling from the back. And that's when it happened. There was a snap, a sound like something popping. What was that? Although I frequently fly for work, I had never heard a sound like that before. Looking around to find the source of the noise, I glanced behind me and almost shouted, "Oh no!" The sound came from the flight attendant's skirt. The hook on her waist had broken, causing the seams of her skirt to open wide on both sides. And as she moved, the zipper started to slide down on its own. Oh no, I can't take this anymore. The moment her white underwear became visible through the opening of the zipper. I stood up from my seat and hurriedly took off my jacket. I'm sorry. What? As I covered the flight attendant's waist with my jacket, she turned around at the same time. In that instant, in my haste, I accidentally tripped. Sir, excuse me. Oh, I'm sorry. I just wanted to save her from embarrassment and secretly tell her about the skirt while covering her with my jacket. But because I tripped, I lost my balance, and to onlookers, it looked like I was hugging her. Oh no, is this a pervert? What? A passenger who saw the scene muttered in a rather loud voice, which triggered the others. The other passengers began to stir, saying things like a pervert here, and leaned into the aisle, all eyes now on us. I'm sorry. It's not what it looks like. I hurriedly distanced myself from her, trying to explain. But even so, I couldn't let go of the flight attendant's waist. If I did, the jacket would fall, and her underwear would be completely exposed. Then, at that moment, "How long do you plan to keep touching me?" she muttered in a low voice that only I could hear, then looked up and glared at me sharply. Her face looked like she was about to cry. Summer? What? Seeing her face, a name slipped from my lips. For a brief moment, the flight attendant